When I started running businesses 20 years ago, I was the servant to the business for many, many years, which meant that my entire life was optimized to serve the business. There was a big switch in my life where I realized that actually I am not supposed to serve the business, but the business is supposed to serve me. It has to serve my ambition. It has to serve the vision of the world that I would like to see, and it has to serve the kind of life I want to lead.
Before we start the show, I'd like to ask you to please hit that subscribe or follow button. Your support is what fuels this podcast and provides the impetus to grow the show. It helps us book guests to tell their wild and funny career stories and also provide insight into the future of their industry. And here's the magic part. For every new subscriber we get, a unicorn is born somewhere in Australia, which means in the not too distant future, Netflix will be live streaming a unicorn versus kangaroo boxing match. If you want to see such a spectacle, please hit that subscribe button. And while you're at it, please go ahead and rate this podcast too. I'm not saying you should rate it 5 stars, even though I think you should. But I am saying the number of stars you give this podcast should reflect the number of days in the work week. And now, on to the show. Welcome to the Career Circus, the Story Night podcast that uncovers crazy career stories, the stories that are just too out there to keep to yourself. Each week, we are joined by esteemed guest champions from the realms of politics, commerce, governance, sports, and media, who recount stumbles, misunderstandings, and the lighter side of one's professional quest. And today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Jatin Modi, founder and global CEO of Renaissance, a B2B strategy, branding, and marketing firm. Jatin is known for blending decades of Eastern philosophical study with extensive experience with global corporations to offer unique insights into organizational behavior and cross-cultural communication. He's also a business school professor and angel investor and a prolific writer on Substack, where he writes about brands, empire, and culture, exploring which stories are dying and what replaces them. And he joins us now from Lithuania. Jatin, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thanks, Ali. It's a pleasure.
So you're an Indian guy who studied at Stanford and has his own company. Most people who fit that description end up in Silicon Valley and tech, but you're in Lithuania. And for the Americans listening, Lithuania is not a part of Disneyland, it's a country in Eastern Europe. How did you end up there, and what's it like to be an Indian in Lithuania?
Well, the time I lived in Silicon Valley and being in the Stanford circuit, I think the overwhelming feeling that I remember from that time is always feeling that I'm not enough. And what I mean by that is that I was surrounded by such incredibly smart people. The kind of moonshots that they were targeting were so big that they always felt that they're not good enough or not enough. In other words, if somebody's has sold a company for $100 million, they're already sad that it's only $100 million. It wasn't $1 billion. So this made me feel existential out there, and it made me really question whether this is the place I want to be in, and raise my family in. And I don't think the purpose of life is to work only. I think there are other things which are very interesting to me. And so, long story cut short, my wife is Lithuanian, and Lithuania is in Northeast Europe. It's very white. And as a brown guy here, it's interesting because I clearly stand out. And, but it's also a beautiful country. It's got great nature. It's got great, everything which is state sponsored really works. The infra works, the healthcare works, the schooling works. There's no crime. So it's a beautiful country to bring up a family in, and it offers a great middle path for life where you can go out and pursue your ambition as well as have time to reflect and think about what is it that you want rather than what society wants for you.
Yeah, that's really interesting because it sounds like you're touching upon how when you were in Silicon Valley, you felt a kind of a pressure to achieve what society's telling you need to achieve based on the fact that you are studying at Stanford, you're based in the Bay Area, and you've found Lithuania's kind of counterpoint to that refreshing. Any other things that you find great about Lithuania? And the flip side of that question was, any kind of cultural faux pas you've experienced while being in Lithuania, given that As you mentioned, there's not many Indians there.
All the people here are quite sweet. They had the Soviet oppression until 1990. They were part of the Soviet Union. And when they came out of it, it's really the last 30 years or 35 years that they've come into capitalism. It's it's very interesting that they have a deep sense of rootedness to their language, rootedness to their culture and land. And they're very land oriented in the sense they're very connected to nature. The seasons over here are very distinct. You get summer, autumn, spring, and winter very, very clearly. And that makes people very deep. So for me, it's just been a great cultural immersion. I think they're very curious about India in general and Indians, I would imagine. So faux pas, but a lot of mutual interest. It's very cold, which is something which I don't like. So 7 to 8 months a year can be quite cold. And I'm from South Asia, where it can be quite warm, much like in Dubai. So, but other than that, no complaints.
And on a scale of 1 to 10, how many Lithuanians have you recruited for your cricket team?
That's a good question. They play basketball here, and even my wife, she has not caught on to cricket, unfortunately, so far, in spite of me trying a lot.
Not even 2020, the entertaining version of the game?
No, she's not into it.
It's a great game, but we're not here to plug the IPL, even though it's a great product. So you're from India and you've been an entrepreneur for the longest time. You founded your first company while in college back in 2006 in India, which is a famously bureaucratic place. Did you have to get creative as an entrepreneur at pushing back at bureaucracy, at hiring, at product testing when you started your entrepreneurial journey in India?
India of 2006 was very different from the India of today. In 2006, there was no e-commerce in India. Flipkart and Amazon did not exist in India. Flipkart is the Amazon competitor in India, owned by Walmart. And the internet was very in its nascent stage at that point of time. There was no venture capital networks, no angel networks, no mentor networks, and none of that existed. So I think it was a very different place to grow your business in than what it is now, where I think the Indian ecosystem is amongst the most exciting in the world today. Startups are mushrooming in Bangalore, in Mumbai, in Delhi every second. And they're very innovative, very interesting startups founded by very smart entrepreneurs. There is funding available, there's networks available. And I really think that India is a great place to do business today. There is still bureaucracy, judiciary still does not work. However, just the scale of the audience that you can have, the growth that you can experience is so high that some of these problems don't bother you as much. I think bureaucracy and judiciary especially become very large challenges in large infrastructure projects. So if you're in oil and gas or manufacturing steel or aluminium, I think then there are challenges that you grapple with, which people like me who are more on the digital side of things don't necessarily experience.
And has your business benefited from the fact that you might be related to the Prime Minister?
I'm not.
Would have been nice.
Yeah, would have been nice, sure. Would have been nice. Yeah. I think all around the world, our Prime Minister is quite, known. He's quite a tall leader on the global stage today. So a lot of people connect those dots. It's always helpful to have that chat to break the ice with people. So it's always helpful.
Yeah, he's a big personality. Now, you're also not just the CEO of Renaissance, you're an amazing writer. You have a most unique talent for connecting what's in the world around us today, if it's AI or trade wars, rise of authoritarianism, to historical analogies, if it's Napoleon or French Revolution or otherwise. How do you end up being that guy on the internet who's able to explain today from yesterday when it comes to business? And what is the best historical analog for the moment we're in today?
Well, I have always found history very interesting. So I've read history extensively right from my childhood, and I've found the characters interesting. I've loved understanding the arcs of their story. For me, Joseph Campbell, he wrote a book called Hero with 1,000 Faces. And that's basically the arc of a hero, the story arc of a hero. And that became very interesting to me to see that how most heroes that we look up to in history, their story arcs had something to do with this particular journey that Joseph Campbell describes. And human nature, regardless of what happens external to us, human nature remains constant. And this we experience through thousands of years of history, right from Marcus Aurelius 2000 years ago on to today. And so if we are able to understand some of these stories and what wisdom they have for us, I think it becomes very useful for us to navigate the world around us, because we are always plunged in chaos, threat, terrible news, and clickbaits. So all those millions of horror stories which are vying for our attention can be brought into perspective if we just try to understand history and try to guard ourselves against some of those temptations.
Yeah, and you mentioned attention, you mentioned Marcus Aurelius. We live in a world where Aurelius's meditations is timeless and people are still consuming it, 2,000 years after he wrote those words. But they're also consuming it at 1.5x speed while cooking, which undermines the essence of meditation. From your reading of history, is there a moment in history that can be mapped to this world where every last waking moment has to be used productively?
I think the mythology that we have created in the world today is that it is of optimization culture, right? So everything, every waking moment has to be optimized. If you're not doing something productive, you're essentially wasting your time. I have friends who listen to podcasts at 2 or 3x speed. If they go on a walk, they're listening to an ebook or an audiobook. They go to the gym, they have their headphones on, they're listening to a podcast. So even if they're putting their kids to sleep, they'll have something in their ear because, well, for them, it's not productive activity. I don't think there is a historical parallel to this because we just never have had so much stimulus. And this digital dopamine that we are constantly subjected to is so addictive. It's a drug of the greatest potency. And we just never had any drug, I would imagine, being so widespread and so acceptable. At least people would look down upon drug addicts of the past, or they would be excluded from society, or you would need help. You would need to go to a hospital or a de-addiction center. But today, it's acceptable. In fact, it's encouraged. I remember, for example, Brian Johnson, right, who's the health and longevity expert. He just posted something on his Twitter where he said, "I even schedule my time for worry." I was like, wow. This is incredible. I have back pain sometimes, and I'm like, can I schedule that? I would love to do that. It's incredible what this optimization culture has done to the world. The LA Lakers sold off for $10 billion. So you were in LA, right? And the LA Lakers sold off at $10 billion. And people criticized it as a financial mistake because whatever Jerry Buss had invested in 1979, when the NBA was in a terrible shape, the LA Lakers were in terrible shape. Nobody wanted anything to do with the Lakers or the NBA. And Jerry Buss was a property developer, and he invested all the money that he had accumulated in property, in real estate, into this stupid little idea of buying an NBA team. And that compounded over the years, and the company, LA Lakers just sold off for $10 billion. And financial experts on Twitter calculated that against financial returns that you could have made from the S&P. And of course, the S&P beat it. So they said, what the hell? This was a terrible mistake. Why did you buy the LA Lakers? You could have just gone to the S&P and made more money. So, we don't want to live to create memory, to create experience, to create depth in the presence that we have. And if you think about Jerry Buss in that instant, just imagine the championship nights that came up. Just imagine the stars that came, Magic Johnson came from there. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar sunset his career over there. And then eventually, we had the golden age of Phil Jackson and Shaq and Kobe. So how can we put a price tag to that?
Yeah, the emotion that you get from the cultural cachet of the Lakers winning those championships, maybe mentoring the likes of Kobe, who came in at 17 or 18 straight out of high school back in 1996. So your business, Renaissance, is a B2B business. As you mentioned, we live in a world of hyper-optimization where people are literally scheduling time for worry, which is a bit worrying. But at the same time, there's always a cost to such excessive consumption of this drug, as you correctly described, which is widely accepted. The fact that it's widely accepted doesn't change the addictive nature of the product. Does that mean that in your business, you're seeing more demand for offline activity, for disconnecting, or is what you do just much more in the realm of doubling down on digital?
Yeah, so my principal clients are large B2B companies. And I think one of the reasons that we used to work with consumer earlier, and I just found a lot of consumer models very exploitative. Just for example, just recently we saw a slide from Lightspeed Venture Partners where they put up a thesis where they had a slide for the Southeast Asian consumer. So Lightspeed Venture Partners is the backer of Anthropic and Snapchat, and they had a slide which says cheap dopamine as an investment thesis. And they said that the poor in Southeast Asia, they consume 40% more screen. They consume more sweetened beverages. And if they're exposed to microtransactions in games, they're more likely to buy it. So this was an investment thesis that they had come up with, and they were encouraging, I would imagine they were encouraging some of their portfolio startups or potential startups to leverage this behavior and make large businesses. So consumer businesses, I was quite disillusioned by them, and B2B on the other hand, because they sell to businesses, tends to be much more solid. So it's built on solid ground. They're much more, they think longer term. They tend to care for their people much more. I can totally imagine that might be because of the nature of the business itself. And in B2B does not do TV ads. They largely reach out to their customers on digital channels like primarily LinkedIn, and then they reach out to them in events. So these are the two channels they focus on. Everything has to be done really well with B2B because the buyer, we work with enterprise B2B, I should have clarified that. So enterprise B2B, the buyer tends to be C-suite or, pretty senior reps of the customer companies. So yeah, this is a space that I operate in. I enjoy it. They tend to be less exploitative than B2C in general. I think for me, because I own my business, I've been able to retain the ability to pick and choose clients and not have to compromise my values because I have no shareholder pressure and nobody breathing down my neck on quarterly returns. And been running this company for the last 13 years.
And so within that, you're in the B2B space dealing with a vast array of clients. Has there been a particularly wild or outlandish request a client made or something that you've questioned? Are you serious?
Well, I think most CEOs want to become really popular, especially on LinkedIn. I think the thing that I hear the most is a lot of CEOs coming to me and telling me, I want to be a thought leader on LinkedIn. And I ask them, okay, so are you ready to offend people? I say, no. I say, okay, are you ready to express what you tell me in private on LinkedIn? I said, no. So then what are you ready to express on LinkedIn? It's like, it's a PR release, right? And if it's a PR release, there is no thought in PR release. It's like you can sleepwalk your way into a PR release and you wouldn't wake up because it's so boring, so plain, and absolutely, it's made for press. So I think that for you to become a thought leader, you need to have original thought. And most of these CEOs tend to have original thought. It's just that they're scared to express it. So
I hear you. And I would say to those CEOs that people respond to provocative opinions, to thought-provoking ideas. And the evidence would be the popularity of somebody like Howard Stern or Laura Mehdi Hassan, who are very kind of bold and unfiltered in their views and end up getting a big following out of it. Do you sense that these CEOs are kind of going to try to move away from canned PR releases, which, as you mentioned, is so bland?
Well, I think some CEOs tend to be bolder than others, right? So, of course, Elon Musk is the prime example of that. He is at times too unfiltered. And I think that the reason that he has the following that he has is, and I'm not a big fan of him, but I still, as I said, I like to study the arc of story of the people, right? And Elon Musk is being the richest person in the world. It's important to understand his arc. I think people feel that he is real, and that's why they follow him, and they're ready to take a lot of hazard onto their own lives in order to project his views, protect his views, or, take down his detractors on X. So I think he's a great example. And I think following his example, a lot of people have come up, especially on X. So I think that the difference is that CEOs tend to be different from founders. I think founders tend to have the courage to express their thought versus CEOs who often don't tend to because they don't want to offend anybody. But this is very generic. Of course, there are exceptions everywhere. But at a generic level, that's what I would imagine.
Yeah, it's funny because even the most bland opinion could offend somebody, right? Yeah, I could say I love Nutella and somebody would, take offense to that somewhere. So it's not really possible to not offend anybody. Switching gears a bit, you've been an angel investor as well. What's the weirdest product or service you've been pitched where you had to pinch yourself? Like, why would you think people want that?
Well, I must actually first say this, that I'm a failed angel investor. I tried my hand at angel investing, but in a year or year and a half, I realized that I don't have the knack for it. I don't have the talent for it. And so I think I'm a good public market investor, but a terrible angel investor, because angel investing works on the ability to have one very large hit out of 50 investments. And I don't think I like to make 50 investments, and I don't think I have the stomach for 49 of them to fail. Versus in public market investing, where you don't need the biggest hit, you just need to compound. And so therefore you can buy, you can calculate fair value, and you can buy if the price of the equity is below fair value. So yeah, look, in my experience as an angel investor, what I always found very strange was that people would come up, and they've just made an app and they would think it's changing the world and saving the world and they're doing this for humanity. And it's just like, but you're not, it's just this narrative that companies want to put on the fact that they're, puritanical in their intention, as well as that they're doing it to save the world or help the world, for me was very off-putting. And this is true for the Bay Area. This is true for Lithuania, and this is true for India. So it's a pretty large sample set represented there.
You've got this world of people think that their apps are going to change the world. Do you feel that people get it in there? I think you wrote about this not long ago, where reading is down, but apps that track your reading is up. There's like a delicious irony in that. And not everything needs a tech solution. It just doesn't. But I sense that a lot of these startups don't fully understand that, and they think tech is the answer to everything, despite all the social ills tech has caused. Have you sensed that kind of lack of self-awareness from startups?
Yeah, I think, it's not even, I wouldn't even fault startups as much. I think we need to understand the bare bones of where this comes from, at least in my understanding. At Stanford, if you're a business and you want a mission statement, they give you a template for it, right? And that template is freely available online. You can go on Google and just, type the Stanford template for a mission statement. And essentially what that template does is it converts whatever it is that you're trying to do into something which is holier than thou. So it converts, you could be making something which makes your shoe comfortable, right? Just because you wanted to make your own shoe more comfortable. And suddenly this template will make it into something which helps entire humanity get rid of pain in their feet when they wear shoes. So it's this transformation of intention, which is very, very strange to me. And I think today what has happened is that people like you and me and most people have started to have recognition of this double speak, where the intention is something, mission statement is something, it's hung up on the wall, employees don't care for it, customers don't care for it, then why is it even there?
We'll have more from this interview right after this quick break. Amazon Web Services is hiring someone to manage exec comms for $189,000 salary. PayPal is hiring a full-time content creator for its CEO with a salary of over $200,000. Why the big spend? It's because executives know that in a world of AI, communicating with authenticity and clarity is how you drive results. By understanding how people process information, make decisions, and are influenced by others, leaders can create messages that resonate on a deeper level. A CEO who is a true thought leader can attract new business, build trust, and even shorten sales cycles. The good news is you don't need a huge budget to do this. You just need Story Night, a strategic communications firm that applies the talents of Hollywood TV writers to executive communications. Story Night helps position execs as thought leaders who can connect with their audience in a meaningful way. To learn more, visit the Story Night website at story-night.com.
And now, on to the show.
Your company, Renaissance, was once known as Frog Ideas. How do you go from Frog Ideas to Renaissance? Because those have very different connotations and communicate something very different. What was that process like, and what was the impetus for it?
Well, until 2018, the company primarily operated in India. I started the company back in 2012. So I was much younger then, and Frog Ideas sounded, back in 2012, at least in India, the internet was still fresh. And to run a marketing company, Frog Ideas sounded like a really cool name, and the .com was available. So we started with that. But by 2018, we had expanded our scope to work with global B2B companies. And suddenly, when you're working with companies like Schneider Electric or SAP, Frog Ideas does not sound like it carries much weight. So there were two things. One was that I myself had undergone a very deep transformation in my own life, where I had started to realize or understand, or at least question more deeply what impact my work has to have, through the entirety of my life. And Frog Ideas was not that. And then it had to represent the company at a global stage. So eventually, once both of them merged and we were able to understand what is it that I want in my life, Renaissance came into being. And so we've been known since the last 5 or 6 years.
I have a theory about this. My theory is that you went to Florence and you loved it, and you thought, I want to be known as a Renaissance man. And the best way to do this is to rename my company Renaissance. And now everybody knows you as a Renaissance man.
Yeah, wouldn't that be lovely?
Yeah, I noticed you didn't deny it. So maybe there's some truth there. So as you think about the entire arc of your career, which has spanned India and the United States, Silicon Valley specifically, and now Lithuania, what would you say is the moral of the story?
I don't know if I have a moral, but I do have the first thoughts that jump to my mind. And the first is that, when I started my business, when I started running businesses 20 years ago, I was the servant to the business for many, many years. It was like I was serving the business, which meant that my entire life was optimized to serve the business. There was a big switch in my life where I realized that actually I'm not supposed to serve the business, but the business is supposed to serve me. It has to serve my ambition. It has to serve what I would like to see in the world. It has to serve the vision of the world that I would like to see, and it has to serve the kind of life I want to lead. So, for instance, I don't want to work 80 hours a week. The way I like to work is that I like to work 6 hours a day, but I work 7 days a week. Okay. So that's just how I like to work. And I don't like to do any calls on most of those days. I like to spend time thinking, writing, trying to imagine things for my clients and for myself and for the stories that I tell. I spend a lot of time writing. Just by its commercial nature, that writing is not profitable, but I love doing it. So I think that switch was a very, very big one for me. I think it allowed me to design a life where I can do it on my own terms. And that was really, really important to me. And then the second is that I think it's really, really important to understand that business and capitalism has reached a stage where its nature has to be reformed. We have to evolve what capitalism means. Since the last 4 decades, we've made it totally about shareholders, but it has completely destroyed a lot of the fabrics of society, which are very important for us to sustain. The environment, of course, people, and those who are left behind as well. And asset holders have become richer and richer, and, most people have been really left behind. So I think capitalism has to evolve. So the reason of my company is called Renaissance is because I hope that at some point of time, we'll be able to have a renaissance of capitalism where it is a more conscious capitalism, and we can reach a stage where capitalism can exist in harmony. Because I don't think I would like to go into a Marxist utopia of socialism, because we've tried that many times in history and it's never worked. So there is good in capitalism, but it has to be reformed, it has to be evolved. And there is historical precedent for this. So, for example, if you look at religion, missionaries back in medieval ages could be quite violent. And the conversions which happened in South America and in India and so on were very violent. But today, you would think about Christianity and you don't think of that religion anymore. So there is evolution which happens in all institutions. And I think capitalism as an institution really needs a renaissance.
Agreed. But I would point to one key distinction between the current Gilded Age we find ourselves in and the last one from about 100 years ago. The last Gilded Age, FDR, a member of the Gilded class, convinced his fellow oligarchs, Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, etc., that in order to preserve their wealth, they'd have to give up a little bit to preserve social order. And he successfully convinced them to do that. You had the New Deal and a huge wave of social and economic growth in the US that lasted until the Reagan Revolution. In the last Gilded Age, you end up with, Carnegie Hall and the University of Chicago, which is funded by the Rockefellers. This Gilded Age, you've got these guys going to space and just serving themselves. There's no investment in the public good. And certain companies just want to squeeze labor as much as they can. Given your sense of history and your studies, unless capitalism is reformed, what comes next?
Well, we only need to we can go back to the Dutch. And, when as you know, the Dutch became the largest colonial empire after Spain and before the British. But what the Dutch did when they had reached a certain level of prosperity, the first stock exchange was opened in Amsterdam in the year 1600. And they came up with financialized shareholding of companies, right? And that's what we know as equities today. So when they had prospered, what they were doing was they were taking care of their tulips and their townhouses and their boats in the canals and so on and so forth. And eventually, society reaches a stage where if the difference between the haves and the have-nots is so high, there has to be revolution. We've seen this with the French. We've seen this in so many other scenarios where if people are not taken along, and also because there is such polarity between the left and the right. I remember a professor at Stanford. He's a professor of finance, and he's originally Polish. And he told me an incredible story. His parents came to the US as immigrants. And he says, when I was growing up in the 60s, people were asked not to marry on racial grounds or possibly religious grounds. So, somebody would say, hey, don't get married to another race or don't get married to XYZ religion and so on and so forth. He says, but today, nobody cares if you get married to another race or if you get married to another religion. But if you get married to a Republican being a Democrat, or if somebody in the Republican family wants to get married to a Democrat, that's war. So this kind of polarity where people cannot sit down together and discuss things and have a conversation and disagree is so telling and so dangerous for all of us. And I see this even on LinkedIn. Sometimes I express an opinion and, sometimes I get it wrong. But my God, people love to fight. So unfortunately, we are at a stage where economic debt is too high in the US. So the reserve currency status of the US dollar is going to go down. We have extreme polarity. We have extreme divergence between the haves and the have-nots. And what comes next, I don't think sounds very pretty to me. And then on top of that, we have the external order being disrupted by China, where they have the cheapest energy on the planet with green energy, which Washington calls woke. They have the cheapest manufactured goods on the planet, right? They have cheaper healthcare than the US and most Western society, cheaper products, cheaper schooling, cheaper education. So where does this end? You tell me.
I mean, nobody knows. What I would add, though, is it's not a straight line for China. Their demographics are cooked. The population is declining to about 700 million or 600 million in the coming years. And economic growth comes from population growth and productivity growth. So unless their productivity growth can exceed their population decline, Chinese economy is going to contract. And yeah, I think you're right. America has ceded leadership of some of these things to the Chinese. History indicates that when you have such massive gulfs between the haves and the have-nots, it leads to one of two things, is revolutions, as you mentioned, or a police state. And on that harrowing note, Jatin, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing a broad array of stories from history to name change to what an Indian guy's doing in Lithuania, a question I've been wanted to ask ever since I started following you on LinkedIn. Thanks very much for coming on the show today.
Thank you, Ali. Really appreciate you doing this and having me here.
Thanks for listening to The Career Circus. To get a breakdown of what made Jatin's story so compelling, check out the Deconstructing the Saga newsletter at storyunite.substack.com. On the next episode, we'll hear from entrepreneur and venture capitalist David Ulovich. David leads the American Dynamism practice at Andreessen Horowitz, investing in companies that advance US interests in security, defense, and public safety. Tune in to hear stories about selling a company to Cisco, why a degree in anthropology ended up being useful for a career in finance, and what it's like to skateboard with Tony Hawk. The episode drops next week. Until then, goodbye.